late afternoon sun burned low over the horizon, turning the dry plains of Wyoming into a sea of fire and shadow. The wind whispered through the brittle grass, carrying with it the faint scent of dust, horses, and something else, something faint and human. Elijah Boone, a hardened rancher with lines of sun and sorrow etched deep into his face, tugged on the reins of his horse, Dusty. He had been out since dawn, mending fences and driving stray cattle back from the canyon ridge. But now something made him stop. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a feeling, a tension in the air, like the world itself had taken a breath and held it. Then he heard it. A soft, trembling voice carried on the wind. "Easy, it hurts." It was faint, almost lost beneath the rustle of the prairie. Elijah froze, his hand instinctively drifting toward the worn handle of his Colt revolver. "Who's there?" he called, his voice low and cautious. No answer. Only the whisper of the grass and the distant caw of a raven. He swung off the saddle, boots sinking into the dirt. Dusty snorted softly, uneasy. Elijah led the horse forward, eyes scanning the open ground. Then he saw it. Near an old split fence post, a figure lay half hidden in the tall grass. A woman, her dress torn, her skin streaked with blood and dirt. She tried to lift her head but collapsed again with a weak gasp. Elijah's stomach tightened. He dropped to one knee beside her, setting his revolver aside. "Hey now," he said quietly. "Don't move. You're hurt." Her eyes fluttered open. For a brief moment, their gaze met. Dark, frightened eyes full of pain. She tried to speak, but her voice broke into a dry rasp. Elijah reached for his canteen and tilted it toward her lips. She drank, trembling, as though each swallow hurt her. "There you go," he murmured. "Easy, take it slow." When she coughed, he steadied her with a hand beneath her shoulders. That was when he saw the deep gash along her ribs, soaked through with dried blood. "Lord above," he muttered, tearing a strip from his own sleeve. "Who did this to you?" The woman didn't answer, just winced as he pressed the cloth against the wound. "It hurts," she whispered again, her voice raw. "I know," Elijah said softly, his tone changing from command to comfort. "It'll be over quick." He didn't mean the pain, he meant the bleeding, the danger. But the way she looked at him, wide-eyed and trembling, made him feel the weight of every word. He lifted her carefully into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, all bone and exhaustion. He could feel her heart fluttering against his chest, fast and uneven. Mounting up, he placed her before him on the saddle and wrapped one arm around her to steady her as Dusty began the slow ride back to the ranch. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, golden under the fading sun. Elijah kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, jaw tight. He'd seen women left for dead before, victims of bandits, soldiers, or worse. But something about her, her silence, her resilience even through pain, stirred something inside him he hadn't felt in years. When they reached his cabin, the sky was deepening into twilight. The ranch stood quiet and still, a lonely patch of wood and stone in the middle of nowhere. He pushed the door open with his boot and carried her inside, laying her gently on the cot near the hearth. She stirred, her lips parting in a whisper. "Why? You help me." "Because no one else will," he said simply, and turned to stoke the dying fire. The flames rose slowly, casting an amber glow over the room. He fetched a basin of water, tore more cloth, and began to clean her wounds. Each touch made her flinch, but he worked with the patience of a man who had stitched his own skin before. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you here." She said nothing, only stared at the flickering light, her breath shallow. Elijah poured a bit of whiskey over the wound, and she gasped, clutching at the edge of the cot. "Easy," he said again, his voice low, steady. "It'll be over quick." Her body trembled as the pain coursed through her, but then she relaxed, tears streaking the dirt on her face. He wrapped her side with clean bandages, then sat back, breathing hard himself. His shirt was torn, his hands smeared with her blood. The room smelled of smoke, iron, and whiskey. For a while neither spoke. Outside, the coyotes began their distant howling. Elijah leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You got a name?" he asked. The woman didn't open her eyes, but her lips moved. "Mira. All right, Mira," he said softly. "You rest now. You're gonna need it." She turned her head slightly toward him, voice no louder than a breath. "You kind man." Elijah's eyes flickered. "No," he said after a long pause. "Just doing what's right." She drifted into sleep, her breathing finally steady. Elijah sat watching her for a long time, his thoughts heavy. He hadn't planned on saving anyone that day. But now she was here, under his roof, and the world outside would come looking soon enough. The kind of men who left a woman bleeding in the dirt didn't just disappear. He stood, checked his rifle, and glanced through the small window into the darkness beyond. The stars were sharp and cold, scattered across the sky like broken glass. "It'll be over quick," he repeated quietly, though this time the words weren't for her, they were for himself, a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The night passed in uneasy silence. Outside, the coyotes cried to the stars, their haunting calls echoing across the endless plain. Inside the cabin, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the woman's slow, shallow breathing. Elijah sat near the door with his rifle across his knees, half awake, listening. His instincts told him danger wasn't far behind. Men didn't do that kind of harm and then just walk away. When dawn broke, it came with a chill wind that rattled the loose boards of the porch. Elijah stood, stretching the stiffness from his back, and moved to check on Mira. She was still there on the cot, the color returning faintly to her cheeks. Her dark hair was tangled and matted, but in the pale morning light there was a strange calm about her, as though she'd spent years running and had finally found a moment of stillness. He poured some water from the jug and knelt beside her. "You awake?" he asked. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. For a few seconds she stared blankly, as if trying to remember where she was. Then she saw him, and her breathing quickened. Elijah raised a hand slowly. "Easy now," he said. "You're safe here. You're at my ranch." She swallowed, her voice hoarse. "You found me?" "Out near the fence line," he replied. "It looked like someone left you for dead." Mira's eyes glistened with something like fear or guilt. "They'll come," she whispered. "They'll come looking for me." "Who?" Elijah asked quietly. She hesitated. "Men in black coats. They came to my village. They said we had gold, that my brother was hiding it. When he wouldn't tell them, they—" Her voice broke. She looked away, gripping the edge of the blanket. Elijah waited, letting her gather her words. "They killed him," she said finally. "Then they burned the house. I ran. I didn't stop until—" Her gaze dropped to her wound, the memory too heavy to finish. Elijah's jaw tightened. He'd seen the work of those kinds of men before. Mercenaries, bounty chasers, railroad guards gone rogue. The frontier was full of devils in human skin. "You ain't got to say more," he said softly. "You're safe now. They won't find you here." But even as he spoke the words, he wasn't sure he believed them. His ranch sat in the open, miles from the nearest town, a speck on the map surrounded by endless emptiness. If those men were hunting her, they'd find tracks, and once they did, they'd come like wolves. Mira reached for the edge of his sleeve. "You shouldn't have helped me," she said weakly. "They'll kill you too." Elijah looked at her hand on his arm, small and trembling. "Lady," he said, "I've been shot twice, trampled once, and near-starved more times than I can count. If death wants me, it knows where to find me." A faint smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen. "You talk like a preacher," she murmured. "Don't know about that," he said. "But I reckon I ain't one for letting the devil take who he pleases." He stood and went to the table, slicing a bit of dried meat and bread. When he brought it over, she struggled to sit up. He helped her gently, slipping an arm behind her shoulders. She ate slowly, wincing with each bite. "Thank you," she whispered. "Ain't nothing," he said, though his voice softened. "Just food." For a while they sat in silence. The wind whistled through the chinks in the cabin walls, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and rain on the horizon. Elijah's eyes went to the window, scanning the open land. The sky was too still. No birds, no movement. Only the long, waiting quiet that came before something broke. "Mira," he said after a moment, "you remember how many of them there were?" She nodded faintly. 4, maybe 5. One rode a black horse. He led them. "That'll help," he said, mostly to himself. He went to the door, opened it, and stepped onto the porch. The sun had climbed halfway up the sky, gold spilling over the hills. Dusty was grazing near the fence, his ears twitching nervously. Elijah knelt and examined the ground. The dirt was dry but faintly disturbed, hoofprints not old. His chest tightened. He stood slowly, eyes sweeping across the plains. There in the distance a thin trail of dust rose against the light. Riders, 3 at least, maybe more. "They're coming," he muttered under his breath. He turned back inside. Mira saw his face and knew before he spoke. "You have to leave me," she said. "They'll kill you if they see me here." "Not my style," he replied flatly, checking the rifle and setting a second revolver on the table. "You can't fight them alone." "Ain't the first time I've been outnumbered," he said, loading rounds into the chamber. She tried to rise but winced from the pain. "Please," she said, tears welling, "don't die for me." Elijah looked at her, really looked. Beneath the fear and blood and exhaustion, she was alive, barely but alive. And in her eyes, he saw something that reminded him of a promise he'd once made to himself, long ago, when the war had ended, and he'd sworn never to let another soul suffer if he could stop it. "You just keep that wound from opening again," he said quietly. "Let me handle the rest." Outside, the rumble of hooves grew louder, the sound of men shouting faintly on the wind. Elijah moved to the window, rifle steady. He could see them now, dark coats, black horses, faces hidden behind scarves. The kind of men who killed without blinking. He took a breath, exhaled slowly, and whispered the same words he'd told her before. It'll be over quick, but this time he didn't know if he meant the fight or his own life.